Okay, there are a lot of answers to this next question. Russ from Appalachian, Ohio. Hey, Mary Kay, excluding Baker, who is the Browns' worst selection in the first 2 to 3 rounds of the last several drafts? I don't know how far back he wants us to go when he says last several drafts, but I think we can throw this open long term. The Browns' worst selection in the first 2 to 3 rounds. We could do like a draft of just bad draft picks that the Browns have made since 1999. That's how many there have been.
We should do that. That would be funny. That would be. We should think about that this week. We could have a little bit of fun with that. But you got to go with Justin Gilbert and Johnny Manziel. I mean, my goodness, that was such a bad draft. For those guys to come in here, they did not know what they were doing that year at all. I mean, it was just an embarrassment. There's no way you can do your due diligence thoroughly and end up with those two guys. I mean, you just can't. Both of them came in with major off the field issues, and both of them were a train wreck and a disaster right from the start. And somebody should have known that. Ray Farmer was in charge back then. He was in over his head, not ready to be doing that job. And, it's unfortunate because those kinds of things can change the fortunes of a franchise when you're drafting multiple first round picks and you are blowing them, right? I mean, there's just no way. Danny Shelton, was another one that comes to mind. They had extremely high hopes for him. But I mean, the juvenile Jays, or as Joe Thomas calls them, the jackass Jays, that was a really, really bad year. Can you think of some others, Dan, that jump out? Barkevious Mingo. I mean, how about Barkevious Mingo?
Yeah. Corey Coleman.
Coleman.
Yeah, that was a bad one. But I'm just, this 2014 draft, it's so weird, right? They of course had the number 4 pick and they traded it down. And then you see Khalil Mack go number 5, Mike Evans go number 7. And then when the Browns go back on the clock at 8, these are the picks that went just after them. Anthony Barr at 9, Taylor Lewan went 11. Obviously, they had a pretty good left tackle in Joe Thomas already, but Odell went 12. Aaron Donald went 13. It's amazing, like the players that they just didn't take that could have made that so easy. But then on top of that, you throw in the fact that they turned around and drafted Joel Bitonio in the 2nd round and Christian Kirksey in the 3rd round. You had a chance to have a really great draft if you would have just hit those first round picks, and they just completely in a draft that was full of talent, and also, by the way, had Derek Carr, who went after you picked Johnny Manziel. It's so easy to look back at that draft specifically and map out how it would have been a home run, and this team is a pretty good football team for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, that draft alone would be a great podcast. We should seriously think about taking a look back at that draft and just how horrible it was and how it impacted so many things. I mean, really, if you get that draft right, I mean, who knows? Maybe Kyle Shanahan ends up sticking around here and becomes a great coach for the Cleveland Browns at some point. So I think it'd be cool to take a look at the impact that draft had on the next 3 or 4 years of the Cleveland Browns and all the spin-off things that happened and all the guys, like you said right there, that didn't end up here that could have, and the ones that did end up here, and how that, negatively impacted the franchise with firings and all those kinds of things. It was pretty bizarre. We should take a deep dive into 2014.
Yeah, such a strange draft. And then, the Corey Coleman draft was a disaster. And also, we can throw out them not making the pick at number 12 in 2017 when you could have, we talk about franchise altering drafts. If you come away from that draft with Myles Garrett and Deshaun Watson in 2017, a lot of people don't lose jobs. And now, obviously, the irony of that is, 6 years later, you have Myles Garrett and Deshaun Watson, but it's just a very different. They're both a lot more expensive, and you kind of lost those years that those two could have had together. just would have accelerated where this franchise was. And instead they traded out of that number 12 pick. And of course, then there's also the Patrick Mahomes angle of that whole draft.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. I mean, we really should take a deep dive into some of the, some of the colossal screw ups that have gone on with this franchise, with their top picks going back to, I mean, you could almost just go back to from 2014 to now, and find, plenty of fodder there. But the Deshaun Watson pick at number 12 there, first of all, they just did not evaluate him properly. They just didn't have any consensus in the franchise on quarterbacks that year. They had Mitch Trubisky ranked as their top quarterback in that draft. They didn't know what Patrick Mahomes was. They really didn't know what Deshaun Watson was. And in order to actually get him now, they had to give up 3 first-round picks. Now, the odd part about that you would have to include in any type of an evaluation of that one is look what happened to him in Houston, and would all of that have happened here? So there's that. And then, back in some of those years, including that year, they just weren't set up coach front office wise to be successful and to support a young quarterback. They were not in alignment front office and coaching wise. So it might have not mattered if you had drafted any of these guys. It might not have mattered if you had drafted Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen, because if you can't coach them and you can't support them, then they're not going to be all that they can be. I mean, Patrick Mahomes constantly talks about the impact of being with Andy Reid. Josh Allen had Brian Daboll. Would that have happened here? We just don't know.
A lot of drafts.